Welcome to this quick tutorial where I'm going to share with you how you can create custom apps, and in this example how you can use that to embed the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways training content as a custom native experience within Teams, so it looks seamless for your end users and particularly helpful to get them started doing things like remote work or remote learning, and how you can even then customize it further to bring in other resources, so things like maybe your library, website, again into a single place, all in the context of Teams. The end result in just a few minutes time is creating this custom app. And the custom app here is called Get Started. And what it's doing is taking advantage then of the Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways, which means that very easily you can help your users get started using Office 365 and Teams without having to sit down and record your own video tutorials. You can take advantage of all of the free content available, whether it's using things like Word, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, and beyond. All of this content is freely available, and this is actually a SharePoint site that you have then access to and can then manage the content on. So for example, if I go back, I can even then choose to have things like upcoming training sessions and more that are run by your internal staff members. I can go across the different tabs for things like Teams training, OneDrive basics, and you can see this isn't then just SharePoint sites. I can even embed websites. And here's a public link to, for example, the university website, which I can then interact with. Again, this is all in the context of Teams now, meaning I have then the ability to create this digital hub that is then customizable by me for my institution. Heading to the slides. To set up for this, all you simply need is a few key things. Firstly, you need to deploy the free Microsoft 365 SharePoint Online Learning Pathways, and you can get all of that if you go to aka.ms/m365 LP docs, as in Learning Pathway docs. Then what we're going to do is also head over to GitHub, and there is a nice starter that can help us even get this done faster using an app template. So if you go to github.com/msft-teams/tools to then get the app package that we're going to be modifying for the purposes of today. And then lastly, App Studio for Microsoft Teams, which is an app made by Microsoft to again help you create apps without any coding whatsoever. Now, for those that are new to Teams and the app ecosystem, simplest way to think about it is think of Microsoft Teams as an app platform that you can customize and extend. Now, for those who have, say, a smartphone, you should be fairly familiar with the idea that you can go to the App Store, you download an app from the App Store, and then you can go through, and depending on what that app is, it'll take advantage of different parts of the platform. Now, your phone will have different features. It might have a camera, a GPS, so that's where you might have different apps that help you take photos or doing maps. Teams, not a phone, but it is a platform that has lots of different capabilities, things like chatbots, the ability to do things like notifications. But what we're going to focus on are tabs, because what you saw a moment ago was an example of the different tabs that had been then embedded into Teams to give me that rich full screen experience of then content to help my users get started. So let's head back to Teams now to see how we can get this set up. So this app is already complete, but how do you get started? Now I'm going to head back over to the website. Now remember, this was just from a few slides ago. This is the learning path. Now make sure you have deployed the learning paths into your institution, otherwise you're not going to be able to reference the URLs that we'll need as part of this. The way that you'll know, of course, that it's fully deployed is, of course, you've just followed the steps to get it set up, and then the result will be this. And a SharePoint site fully functional within your institution that you can then customize and control. Keep in mind, there are placeholders. So for example, if I click on Ask Questions and Get Help, now this, of course, we don't have the URL to your IT support site or your internal communities. Make sure you come to these pages and just quickly look through them. For example, here, note to the administrator. This is where you should come through and then do things like quickly doing an edit. So then that way you can edit, for example, adding in the URL to your help desk or to your internal adoption community or other training materials that you have. So a bit of a quick tip, do make sure that you come to this and then just fill in those blank placeholders, and everything else has then already been done for you. So All right, you're at a position, you've deployed the learning pathways, fantastic. Next up, we need to go over to GitHub. From GitHub, so MSFT tools, you'll see up the top there, the URL from before. If I head on over and click on Get Started App, what this allows me to do is then I can see the app itself, and all I need is the Getting Started zip. Clicking on Getting Started zip, I can then just click on the download button, and just like that, you'll see I've now downloaded the Getting Started zip. Now you might be saying, well, what is this? Simply, this is an app package. It has everything that we need to create an app for Teams, and it's already been pulled together. But what we're going to do is customize it for our institution, because your tenant is different to the tenant that I'm setting this up in. So while overall you can then reuse most of it, the URLs, for example, to your SharePoint sites will be different, and that's why you need to go through and just do a few small edits, which is what we're going to do now. All right, so to get started, I'm going to simply go over to the App Store, search for App Studio. And if you don't see App Studio, this means you have disabled apps in the App Store. So you need to go to the admin portal. And I'm going to go to the admin portal a little bit later on to show you how we can then do things like app policy, which means this will be pinned for our users. But if you've disabled this for yourself, you definitely will need to enable it. This helps you then to create apps. Now, super powerful and very easy to use. I just simply click on it, click on Open. You can see here it's made by Microsoft. And this is where I can then have a conversation with the chatbot, so I can ask it things and different types of questions. But what we're going to do is actually click on the tab Manifest Editor. Now you'll notice here, this is already then a few of the apps that I've already created. Now you could create a blank app. This is great if you wanted to create a app to different websites, or even start to push the boundaries and do things like creating your own chatbots. For the purposes of right now though, we already downloaded an existing app package. So I'm just going to click Import Existing App. Head on over to Downloads, Getting Started, and just like that, I now have the Getting Started beta. So this is what you just downloaded a second ago from GitHub. Now I can go over and click on the 3-dot ellipsis and click Edit. And this is now what I have customized to turn it into the Getting Started app. Now you can go through here and start to then change a few of the details. So I'm going to get rid of the beta. If you wanted to change any details, you're welcome to at this point in time. Do try and keep the version and things, so you increment it when you actually have a newer version if you make changes. Again, feel free if you need to update the URLs here. This is where you might want to actually give the name of your institution. So I'm going to call this Contoso University. But you could call, this could be your school, your college, again, your choice. Typically, you would normally then put in a link, for example, to your institution here and there. Now, no one is actually going to be checking this unless you publish it to the Microsoft Store, which you will not be doing. The time when this information is reviewed, things like the privacy statement, the terms of use, is only when it's submitted to the Microsoft Store to be a public app. We are not creating a public app today. We are just creating an app for our internal use. So at this point in time, it's your choice what you put in here. This is just for your end users. This will not be checked by Microsoft because you are not publishing it to the Microsoft Store. It's only done through the formal public store approval process. Now, you've got the existing branding here. What I would recommend is replacing this with white icons. And the reason I suggest that is so that way it looks and nicely matches in on the left-hand side here. Because otherwise, having brightly colored icons will look kind of jarring compared to the rest of the app icons. So as a quick tip, what we're going to do is go through and update the branding. All right, so just make sure you have an image that is 192 by 192 pixels. And you can give it a color. White's always a good one, just as a contrast. Okay, so we've now got everything set up from the app details. Most of it was already filled, and again, you can update with your own links. Now remember a second ago I said the Teams platform has different capabilities. We're just going to be focused on tabs for today, but this is where we can then start to see really rich and powerful apps being created. Now I'm heading straight on over to tabs, and immediately I can then see the different tabs that are available. The training portal, Teams training, OneDrive, help desk, and benefits information. Now, if you want to, you can then delete it. So if you don't want to have a tab for benefits, just click delete and it's gone just like that. Now, the important thing to do here is twofold. You can see I can go over and I can have a look and edit and look at the URLs as they currently stand. Now, that is not the URL to my SharePoint site because, again, the only way I'll get that URL is when I deploy it to my institution, as you can see here. Now, what we're going to do is two things. We're going to then update this URL, and then we're also going to make sure we put in single sign-on so that way it can then be available both in the desktop app and also in the web browser. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to update the training portal URL. To do that, I simply head on back to my site, and this is my site here. As you can see it, this is the landing page, and there is my tenant name. Now what I'm going to do is simply go back to the training portal URL and edit and update that portal. Now that's quite simply, you'll see there the difference now is the tenant name as part of the URL for my organization. Clicking save, I can go through and then go down, and of course I'm going to come back and update these in just a moment, but I just want to show you something why we're actually going to take an extra step. Now to test it, simply click on install. You'll notice it now has that updated icon that we've done, the again, Contoso University, which is looking great. I can click on it, that'll take me to the URL that I need, and from here I can click on add. Now you'll notice here that the app has loaded, but the SharePoint page hasn't. Now we did give it the SharePoint URL, but there is a quick workaround that we need to do because in the desktop app, we need to make sure that the credentials get passed to the SharePoint site so the SharePoint site can load. If you're using this right now in the Teams web app, you'll notice the page does load because the web app is able to pass the credentials slightly differently. Good news, it's a really easy, quick little piece that we need to add to the URL, and then it'll load beautifully both in the web browser and also in the Teams app itself. So let's see how we can do that. Head back to App Studio, Manifest Editor. There is our app, and click on Edit. Head on back to Tabs, and let's go back to the training portal URL. Now, we did update the tenant name so that way you can see the tenant that I'm currently a part of, but we do need to do something else to update this URL. Let me show you what that looks like. Now, for the change we need to make, that's actually something that Jethro has covered in a blog post that he wrote. So if I scroll on down, you'll see he's got a good bit of information around embedding SharePoint Online sites, but the key part that we need to be aware of is how we can then help the URL to realize that it's within a Teams scenario and then still do the logon experience silently and automatically for the user. Now we just need to add this piece here to the URL itself. Now if I open up Notepad as an example, now this is the extra piece we need to add to the URL. So let's bring that down a bit. Let's head back to Teams. Let's grab this. And now let's go through and then paste that there. Now you'll notice in the blog post, we have to do it at the /sharepoint.com/ we add this in, and then we just continue with the rest of the pathway itself. Heading back over is now I just simply copy that extra bit, sharepoint.com/, and then there we go. Now that I've added this in, I'm going to click copy, and then I'm going to update this here. and then click Save. Says it must be a valid URL. Oh, I accidentally, if you do make a small mistake, like adding in some white space, just delete the white space. And there we go. Let's update the Teams training. Click on Edit, copy. Let's bring this back. Now remember, I need to update the existing site itself to my institution, and then we're going to copy over that extra piece here. And again, this just goes in the after.com / and then adding in the / so we have that extra little bit. And there we go. Now that I've got this, go across, copy, paste that one in. Make sure that you don't paste any extra white space, and then click Save. One last time, let's grab the OneDrive for Business, copy, paste that one in, update that, add in .com / and then there we go, update the URL, hitting across, pasting that back in, clicking Save. There we go. Now for the last one, we're actually going to do something a little bit different. You'll notice here it says the IT Help Desk, but I actually want to, instead of using a SharePoint site, I want to share a public website that my institution has. Now I'm going to share a website link to the library. Now keep in mind here, the only key requirements, just to keep it simple, is that the website doesn't require authentication and that it can be embedded in an iframe. Now to go through, if I go over and click on Remove for the existing placeholder, I'm going to click Add Tab. We'll call this one Library. We can put in an entity ID of digits or a unique string. And now I'm just taking an example library website that is available. Okay, now that brings it together. We do need to do a few extra things to help with that single sign-on, and then we're done. Now you'll notice here, it's automatically then picked up my SharePoint URL in addition to the existing URLs that are valid domains, because again, we need to be able to bring in those SharePoint sites. The last part though is I do need to have the ID, so then that way it will sign on for a SharePoint site. What does this actually look like? Well, we're going to head back to the blog. So here we go. The last step here is we just need to grab the ID for a SharePoint Online instance, which we paste into there. And then finally, single sign-on. Now this is the URL to your SharePoint site. So I'm just going to head back over, copy the URL pathway, paste that one in there. And now we're going to do test and distribute. Clicking on Install, Add, and look at that. By just doing those little URL changes and allowing the single sign-on pass-through, now we have this very rich set of content for my users to be able to go through and then do things like go for learning pathways with Office 365. And remember, because this is SharePoint Online, in your instance, you have the ability to customize what users see here. Very, very powerful. And you can also then add additional tabs, whether you want to have specific pages really detailed on Teams, OneDrive, or again, things like public-facing websites that you might want your users to easily find. In this example, the library website here. Now, this is how it becomes a very powerful tool and very easy to create. Okay, so you might be saying then, well, what do we do to actually distribute this to our users? Because so far, I've been the only person able to use this app because, of course, I'm the one creating it. Well, let me show you what we can do there. I'm going to head back to App Studio, click on the Manifest Editor, and then open this up, which is the app we've been working on. Head back over to Test and Distribute, and from there, I'm now going to click on Download. Now, this is going to give me that app package file, very much like the one that we started with, except now this has the changes that we've made unique to our institution. Clicking on Download, you'll see this has been successfully exported, and then check the default download folder. Perfect. So if I go and do that, there it is, our app package Get Started. If you're really curious, you can open it up and then you'll see the manifest file and effectively the details on how an app in Teams comes together. But we don't need to actually make any changes here, we just need to upload this. To do that, head over to the apps on the left-hand side, and you as an administrator will have the ability to upload an app for everyone within your institution. And of course, alternatively, this is where I've been just uploading an app personally for me by clicking install. Now where it says upload for Contoso, it'll say your institution name, so your university, school or college. And where it says built for Contoso, that's because again, that's the name of my institution. So when I go over and click on this, you'll see that there is my Getting Started app. So all I would need to do, click upload for Contoso, and then go over to my downloads and then click on Get Started and then click Open. Because I've already done this, for the purposes of right now, I won't. Let's say over time we wanted to go through and then also maybe make changes to the icons or maybe some of the description or add in another tab. Now that I've uploaded it, I can also click Update by then just updating the package itself. As a tip, please make sure you will get an error if you don't increment the version. So what I mean by that is if I go back and click on Edit, notice the version here. You know, if you're going to make an update where you maybe add in another tab or change some of the wording, for example, you would want to change this from being 0.3 to 0.4. Just an important tip like that. Now, for anyone that's saying, hang on a second, I don't see this upload for my institution, well, that's because you've disabled it for yourself. So this is where I'm going to take you now to the admin portal, and this is whether you have successfully uploaded it for institution, or if you can't upload it for institution, I'm going to show you then where these settings are, because what we want to do now is make sure that this Getting Started app also is now being pinned on the left-hand side as part of the navigation menu. All right, so from the Teams Admin Center, and of course you do need admin credentials to be able to access this area, head on down from the dashboard to Teams Apps and expand. You'll notice that if we go to Manage Apps, all of the apps that my institution can have access to are here. So this includes third-party apps that other publishers have submitted. So for example, Adobe and many, many others. You'll notice that if I now search for my app, so it's started, this is the custom app that I have published. It has my version history, and you can see here that it is a custom app. Now, for anyone who wasn't able to upload an app before, this is where you can also upload it if you have restricted yourself to not be able to upload apps to your tenant from the Teams client. You'll notice if I go over to org-wide settings, this is where I can see these settings. For example, allow third-party apps, and then allow new third-party apps, and specifically allow interaction with custom apps. Now, of course, this needs to be on if you want your users to be able to interact and access the custom app that you have just created. Very important to be aware of. Heading over to App Permission Policies. So again, this is where if you do have restrictive app practices, you would need to come in here and then click Edit. By default, if you are doing best practice, which is allowing your users to be able to access your tenant apps and first-party apps, you would have all apps enabled. But again, if I needed to allow specific apps, I would simply go here, because again, this is a tenant app that I have created. And you'll notice there is my Get Started app. And of course, this would be the name of the app. Should you give it a different one, whatever app name you choose was what you would search for and add in just up here. But I'm going to click cancel out of there. And now lastly, and this is the exciting part, is we have then set up policies. And what these allow you to do is then have it so for your end user, they don't need to go to the App Store and search for the app. It'll by default be pinned on the left-hand side of their screen. Now, when I go over, you'll notice that I have now the ability for upload custom apps is on. That's why I could upload a custom app, but just because this is on doesn't mean my end users can upload custom apps to the tenant, and I'll show you what that means in a moment. And also allow user pinning. So pinning is when a user goes into Teams, and for example, let's say they really like Planner, they can pin Planner to their app bar. What we're doing is using a policy to then pin the Getting Started app, so it'll permanently stay there. There will be no action required by the end user. Now to do that, I've already set it up, but if you need to, of course, for your first time, you would simply click on Add Apps, search for Get Started, and then you would just click it and click Add. And now, just like that, here it is. I can also move the position up or down. As a rule of thumb, do not change these first different options that we have available within Teams. So activity, chat, Teams, calendar. If, for example, you move other apps above these, particularly on mobile devices, things like your calendar or Teams would actually go into the app drawer and be much harder for users to find. So best practice is to leave the most important parts of Teams in its existing order. And again, this will then align to all of the documentation, and add in any other custom apps or other apps like Planner that you might want to pin after the list like I have done here. So for example, I've left Getting Started now after the Files app. What I would do is then just click Save. Now, if you do have different policies for different users, you can, for example, have a policy for students versus a policy for educators. The way that that would work is you would create different policies here. And remember that policies are assigned per user. So what that means is if we go to one of our users, let's say Kara, I click on Kara, and I can go and see the policies that she has assigned to her. Now, this is where you would then, for example, if you wanted to have a policy be applied to all staff that is separate to all students, I would use the global policy for all of my students because they are the larger group. And by default, then what I will do is I would go through and I would then change the policy for my staff, for example. And this is, of course, you could do it manually by clicking through the user interface here. I'm not proposing that you do that. You would normally then use PowerShell, and then using PowerShell, you can iterate across your users and apply then the different policy that you would like them to have. So because I use the global policy, I want all of my users to receive the Get Started training materials. That's why I've left it with Get Started. But again, you can create different policies for different users. So you could even have a policy for your researchers versus educators versus staff members. So very, very powerful to be aware of. Bringing it all together, what does this look like for our end user? From the end user's point of view, I now see, logged in as one of the educators or a student, that there is my Get Started on the left-hand side here. So as the user, I didn't take any action. This was based on the app setup policy. Clicking on Get Started. Now I can move through. I have this rich space. And again, this is SharePoint. So for example, this is where you could have your upcoming training sessions that you might want staff members or students to be able to attend, or if you don't want them at all, it's a SharePoint site, so you can remove it. I can navigate through, view the on-demand training content available within here. So if I wanted to have a look at how to use things like, let's say, Microsoft Planner, I can jump straight into it with videos and all. And then of course the other tabs that I have along the top, which for example is the website that I saw and embedded earlier. Now, a few things to quickly remember is if I am Kara and I am very zoomed in, so for example, if I'm on a smaller desktop, the more I zoom in, eventually then you'll see on the left-hand side here, the user interface will try to respond, but over time, if you're really zoomed in, you might see this come into the 3-dot ellipsis as the app then is trying to respond to your screen resolution itself, but just something to be aware of depending on the size and zoom that you have on the desktop client. Depending when you're watching this video, app policy at this point in time is still in preview for it to apply to mobile devices, but if you're watching it at a later point, it might already be available. So you'll see here today, the custom app is not yet appearing as part of the app drawer in My App. Be aware that you can see what the preview will look like if you tap on the menu, going to Settings, About, and Developer Preview. So what this will do is switch it into preview mode. From preview, now I can go back, open up that app drawer one more time, and then click on the Get Started app. This is preview, so please do keep that important tag in mind, but now you can see that we have it in here. Something to be aware of is with navigation, for example, if you do press the back button right now on the device, it'll take you back within Teams, not back within the website or the SharePoint site. So just something to be thoughtful of in terms of the way that you message this and the expectations that you sort of set with your students or staff members itself. Last thing to keep in mind when it comes to the content that you have to help users with getting started or providing them internal resources, do be mindful of the fact that there are many help resources for Teams within Teams. So try to avoid replicating the Teams resources too much in the learning pathways. Of course, there is some default content there, but when it comes to Teams, always make sure you are taking advantage of and showing your end users how to do things like go to the help button in that bottom left-hand side, which has many topics around taking the advantage of the full Teams for Education capabilities, as you can see here. And then there's even built-in training videos that you have available, for example, that you can play directly within the Teams client itself. So something to be aware of and make sure that you are sharing with your users. In summary, to bring it all together, a few tips is if you are getting errors at any point or it's not loading correctly, triple check your URLs. If you've got the wrong / in there somewhere, this is what will be causing the issue for it to not load. If you aren't seeing it appear in the nav bar after you apply app policy, make sure you actually wait at least 24 hours for app policy to apply. So that way it will then apply for the end user. And keep a considerate name for the app you create. So, Get Started, as you can see there, it looks really nice on the screen. If you have a really long name, it will just run off the screen and it won't look good. So, keep it to 10 characters or less app name. So something like, library, another great example of a short name that would be added in. Avoid and consider, don't use app policy to now add, 20 different apps to the left-hand side. It's not meant to be a bookmark. It's meant to be a great experience for your end users. And so be considerate, like where we had then one app and that app had multiple tabs for training or for the library page. That is a really great way to approach it. So think of it more as one app for your institution that you can then customize within, rather than creating, 50 apps for 50 different things for users to go check. Currently, if you're embedding a SharePoint site, the top of site navigation will not appear. So it means you can't, click the back button because it's not a website. It's still embedded inside of Teams. So be considerate if you are making your own SharePoint sites that you have a back button or navigation on the screen to move around then the UI itself. And lastly, that you can't use websites that aren't able to embed in an iframe. So just a few things to consider. Hope you found this session useful and enjoy creating your custom Teams app.